Stay tuned for part 1 of the Kenny Wingfield interview. Part 2 will continue next week. Oh, hello, Roanoke. Welcome to T-Bone's Best of Roanoke show, where we go after the best people, places, and things to do in our fair city. Big thanks to our studio band and my special guest host, Mr. G. Woo! Now, on with the show. He's Kenny Wingfield, author of All I Ever Wanted to Be and cross-country cyclist. You've probably seen him riding his three-wheel bike around Roanoke throughout the past few years. Kenny, thank you for having Mr. G and I in your home today.
Thank you for having me, or thank you for showing up. I appreciate it.
Well, you know, I want to talk about this book. The book, All I Ever Wanted to Be, did that come out in 2018?
It did. It did. It's been out less than a year now. It's was an experience writing it. It was very cathartic, reliving my life through the written word and writing it. The title itself, as I grew up playing sports, and all I ever wanted to be was an athlete. And one of the things I had against me was I was a fat little kid and not that good of an athlete. But then again, I was a good athlete because I never quit. I had heart, even as a little kid. And but every time I felt like I was getting close to that pinnacle, something would happen to my life physically and set me back. And I never felt like I reached that goal. But as I wrote the book and relived all of my experiences, all of my different events I've participated in over the years, I am an athlete. Albeit I'm a disabled athlete, but nonetheless, I'm an athlete.
Well, let's talk about that, the disabilities that you've had. Elaborate on that.
I started off at a young age, and a lot of times kids are just so resilient in illnesses that they deal with. And fortunately, to some degree, mine began at the age of 12. In the 6th grade, the polio booster used to be given as a live virus on the sugar cube. And I was given that. I remember being marched down to the cafeteria and a nurse setting the sugar cube on my tongue. Which kid wouldn't want a sugar cube on their tongue? And but a couple years after that, I started having really, really bad leg cramps. Not knowing where it was coming from. My parents didn't know where it was coming from. My dad was a railroad man, my mom a housewife, the blue-collar people.
Here in Roanoke?
Here in Roanoke, yes. Been here in Roanoke my whole life. They took me to a doctor who was right out of college at the time and recommended by everybody, and he described it as a delayed birth defect. You know, what in the world is a delayed birth defect? In other words, he didn't know. And he did extensive surgery on my right foot and ankle. By today's standards, you could almost call it butchery. I even go into that in my book. And I'm not faulting him because he was good at the time. It's just they have improved so much in the types of surgeons that are out there today. But from there, I moved on. I played football in high school for Patrick Henry. We were state champions my senior year. I was not a starter. I was not a star, but I was part of the team.
Yeah.
And the coaches, they took that young kid that had the beginnings of a broken body and taught him to believe in himself and taught me to never quit. And that is fortunately one of the things that I've carried through in my life with all the other issues that I've dealt with. Some of the other things I have, in the early 90s, I started having vision problems, and I lost sight in one eye, actually. And I went to a neurologist, and they did some testing, and he said, well, I believe you have multiple sclerosis. But I have a doctor that I'd like to refer you to down at Duke. So I went down to Duke, and they did some further testing, and they said, well, you have neurofibromatosis, which are benign tumors that form along the central nervous system. Well, in 1990, they took 3 tumors off my spine, on my neck, and they were benign tumors, fortunately. And then in 1991, they took an acoustic neuroma off my left ear, leaving me completely deaf and with no inner ear on that side, which has affected my balance and my hearing, obviously, in the latter years of my life. But still then, I didn't quit.
Right.
I used to play a lot of sports. I have trophies upstairs from racquetball, softball, volleyball, bowling. But when I lost my inner ear, I lost my ability to participate in athletics. So there I was with another setback. So
who would have guessed it would be the inner ear after all your health issues? It was the inner ear. You know,
that's been my main nemesis over the years, even more than MS. And I hate to say that, but I don't hate to say it because it's the truth.
Right.
And
how old are you?
62. And I've lived every year too. I feel it.
Yeah.
But I found another sport after I lost my inner ear.
Right, because that essentially knocked you out of all the other things.
I lost my ability to participate in sports that required a good eye-hand coordination.
Right.
So a friend of mine said, well, let's ride a bike. And I remember the very first bicycle ride I went on, he took me up the hill that goes toward Cave Spring High School, and I thought I was going to die. I thought, what am I doing? But I didn't quit. I kept riding. And that was in probably 1991, shortly after I had my inner ear surgery. And people say, well, how can you ride a bicycle missing an inner ear? Well, it's kind of like a gyroscope. The motion gave me my balance.
Oh, okay.
And so as long as I was moving, I was okay. But when I came to a stop, I had to be careful.
All right.
And I always had to land on my left foot because my right leg was no good due to the surgery I had as a child. And I have fallen over a couple of times, kind of like you used to see the guy on Laugh-In on the tricycle fall over. Well, that was like me a few times over the years, but everybody's fallen over on their bicycles. You just have to learn to get back on that horse and ride it again. Cycling, some of the longer rides, I got into long-distance cycling.
And this is on a regular bike at this time?
On a two-wheel bicycle with gears, obviously.
Right.
But my very first long-distance bike ride was in 1991, and I rode the Blue Ridge Parkway from Front Royal, Virginia to Cherokee, North Carolina.
How long do you think that is, Ken?
It's just over 500 miles.
Oh.
And it took me about 12 days. I mean, I wasn't riding any super long distances then, but then again, I was riding some big hills that I never had. You know, I'd gotten used to riding some big hills, but I've never been a good climber, but I just loved riding. And so I kept going because I love the downhills.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely.
Kenny, I'm looking at the cover of your book.
Yes.
And I heard you, but I kind of didn't hear you because I told you I can't hear too well. Your left foot on the cover almost looks it almost looks like a stump, right?
It is. And another thing, I've lost 2 toes on that foot, so I can only count to 18 now.
Right.
But that right leg, as you see right now, I'm wearing a brace on it now.
Right.
Because getting up to another one of the things I'm dealing with is post-polio syndrome. That started up roughly about 10 years ago, right about the time I was ending up my working career.
But you were pedaling a two-wheel bike with your foot in this condition.
Absolutely. And
why is it a stub? Like
that as a result of the surgery that I had on my right foot and ankle as a child, when they took my leg out of the cast, I almost lost it. My leg, which had been strong and muscular even as a child, was about the size of a skinny arm. And even though I've played sports and ridden my bicycle for literally thousands of miles, those muscles never developed back. And so that's why the leg looks so skinny and still does today.
Right. Gotcha.
And you'll see I have one shoe on and one shoe off while you're looking at it.
Yeah.
My right foot, I wore a hole in the bottom of my foot because I used to have what they call clipless pedals where you locked your foot essentially into the pedal. And one of my rides that I did in the mid-'90s, I did a ride called RAGBRAI, the Register's Annual Great Bicycle Ride Across Iowa. I've ridden 3 rag brides. They used to have about 10,000 riders that would do it every year, and I went out there 3 years and did it. The third year was the first year I had my clipless pedals, and I was pushing hard one day trying to ride, and got to our stop that night and took my shoe off, and I had a hole in the bottom of my foot the size of a 50-cent piece.
God.
And, of course, I couldn't ride the rest of that week. I rode in the truck the rest of that week, the last 3 days. And I came home, and slowly, over time, that thing filled back in. And it's kind of hard when you walk on a foot to get it to heal. But I've had a great doctor here that's helped me, and I don't know if I'm supposed to drop any names or anything, but Dr. Stephen Harris, who's a wound healing doctor, has worked with me throughout the years and has dealt with my foot a couple of times when that wound reopened, and we've gotten it closed every time. It's sometimes taken us several years for it to close, but I never stopped riding. And he knew I had that my passion was cycling, and he did everything he could to keep me on my bike.
And so as you were starting out in the early 90s, you took your bike ride like over 500 miles, and then this passion, it's a new passion for you, because it sounds like you didn't really ride bikes much before you had the other issues.
No.
But you moved into it. And so how did that progress, your love for bike riding?
Well, I had plenty of time since I couldn't play my other sports.
Right.
And I found the Blue Ridge Bicycle Club back in the early 90s and rode with them for years. And in fact, I was on a tour with the Blue Ridge Bicycle Club members when I was doing RAGBRAI. And they were just a great bunch of folks that were very supportive. I no longer ride with them, as I no longer ride a 2-wheel bicycle. I had to give that up about 5 years ago.
You transitioned, Kenny, to a 3-wheeler that's hand cranked. Is that right?
I have. I pedal it with my arms now, and I've redeveloped my love for cycling through that bike. And even though last year I had an incident that set me back again with that, I'm probably jumping around a bit. But to answer that question, I had my left hip replaced in October 31st of 2017. And I was down for 6 weeks, and when I got back, my doctor said, well, you can start riding your bike again. So I went out on a December day, a beautiful December day, and was riding my bike. I just returned home, and I was getting my walker, because I have to use a walker now to get around, but I was getting it out of the back of the car, and I felt a sharp pain in my left elbow. And I thought, okay, I just pinched a nerve in there. I've done that before. Well, it never went away. It just kept hurting. Well, a couple of days later, I went to see, went up to Virginia Orthopedic. Dr. Waldrop, he wasn't available, so I saw his intern, and there was another doctor there. He said, well, there's a specialist here. Let me get him. Dr. Jeremy Smalley, who realized that I had torn the muscle and tendon in my left elbow, and we had to reattach that on December 27th of 2017. And that surgery became infected. And on January 19th, they had to redo the surgery, take everything out, clean it out, and put in new parts, and hopefully, they actually had me on IV antibiotics, which I'm on right now. I have a PICC line in my left arm here. And I was down for another 6 weeks. Well, while I was down for the second 6 weeks, I went and bought a laptop, and that's when I wrote all I ever wanted to be.
Oh, while you were down recuperating.
While I was recuperating, I mean, I'd always thought, gee, I'd like to write a book someday.
Right.
I'd like to write a book, but while I was out there writing, I never took the time to do it. So when I had nothing but time, what better time than to pick up a laptop and start writing? And I wrote it in 6 weeks, and I started looking for some publishers, and one publisher wrote me back and said, well, it lacks character definition. I said, well, I'm essentially the only character in it, so are they referring to me? And I thought, well, I've been looking for character for 60-some years now, and I guess I'm still needed to find some. So I ended up self-publishing.
Oh.
And I found a printer online just by chance, and they ended up doing a great job for me. The book, they've done a beautiful job, and I've used Howling Dog Designs out of Boone's Mill. They are a website designer, but Beth Garst there set my book up in the template to send to Digipod, who was the printing company, and they returned something that I was quite surprised to get back. I mean, it actually looks like a book.
Yeah, it sure does.
It sure does. Now, how can people buy the book, Kenny?
Well, they are on sale down at Cardinal Bicycle,
Which is,
on 460, right across the street from Jersey Lily.
right.
Or they have some copies there at Virginia Prosthetics, excuse me, on Williamson Road, right near the stoplight there at the Tasty Freeze at the far end. Or you can buy them from me. I've sold quite a few, actually.
Facebook account?
Using my Facebook.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of my folks, I put out there that I was selling a book, and they touched base with me there. I did a book signing at Cardinal Bicycle in August. I sold over 50 books in 4 hours that day. And I had another book signing at Country Cooking a few weeks ago, and people are just still, coming up to me. Do you still have any books for sale? And I do. And it's.
Well, I want to talk about some of the episodes in the book.
Okay,
cool. And they're not chapters, they're episodes, right?
Exactly.
You couldn't see the smile on his face, but you're pretty damn proud of this book.
I'm proud of me.
Absolutely.
And not to get emotional about it, but I have been through some garbage in my life. And I'm going through some right now.
Yeah.
2 weeks ago, I had to go to the hospital, and when I went to the hospital for back spasms, of all things, I got in there and they found that I had a infection in my bloodstream and an infection in my spine at T8 and 9. So they had to start me on antibiotics, and before they released me, they had to put a PICC line in my arm, and I'm taking IV antibiotics twice a day now to deal with that. So I'm not riding my bike right now. I'm not lifting weights right now. So I'm kind of I ought to be writing another book right now is what I ought to be doing, but I don't have another one in me just yet. I'm working on the next one.
Well, I was just sitting there thinking, Kenny, I said, the way you bounce back, there's a sequel in there in the future.
There may well be, but I can't wait. I'm registered to do already the Myrtle Beach Marathon on March 2nd. I'm thinking I'm going to have to back out of that one. I don't think I'm going to be able to get this PICC line out and get enough training in to do the marathon and the time that I want to do it in. This past October, on October 13th, I did the Salem Half Marathon, and didn't do as well because of my elbow. I've lost power climbing. I can still get up the hills, but it's just a lot slower.
Well, I want people to visualize you're in a three-wheel bike, you're sitting down,
Correct.
and you're hand cranking instead of using your legs to pedal.
Correct.
So to go uphill,
It's a struggle with two good arms, and with one good arm and one that's about half blown. It works you. It works you, and I've slowed down a bit on my climbing, but I still love it because
You look like an athlete, honestly. For all of your issues, I mean, you just look like a strong person.
Thank you.
well, your spirit's there.
Well,
you have the spirit of an athlete.
Can
Well-
you imagine what his arms must look like? I mean, you got like a jacket on them. God.
And I have a full gym down in my basement. That's one of the things I built. I have 10 different machines, 2 sets of Olympic weights, curling bars, dumbbells up to 80 pounds. I don't get down there as much as I should. And right now, I can't do any lifting with my arms, obviously. But that's one of my areas where when it snows or rains, I can go downstairs and do some weights, or even after I do a ride, go down and do some sit-ups or something down there. Just try to keep moving. And even though I can't walk now and I'm on a walker, I
No, go ahead.
still keep moving.
Let me ask you. You said there's little off limit. We can cut this too.
Hey, take it there.
Are you in other surprise? You're still kicking it. I mean, you've had a lot of health issues.
Yeah, I guess I am. Some people, you look at me, you don't realize what I've been through. Because like you're saying, you look at me, you said, you see an athlete, thank you for that. But people don't realize what I've been through. And that's one of the reasons I'm proud to have this book out there, because people can read my story and go, wow. And I go back to what I was originally talking about, that little 10-year-old kid that had heart and didn't quit. And then the coaches that taught that kid to believe in himself again and that he could do things that people didn't expect he could do.
Do you still talk to those PH coaches?
I do. In fact, Coach Gaynor has passed away. Coach Casey, who lives here locally, Sherwood Casey, he came and bought a copy of the book at the book signing there at Cardinal. I ran into him. One of our teammates passed away a couple of days before, Barry Campbell, a great human being and a great athlete too. But and good friend. He passed away, and I saw Coach Casey at his funeral and was telling him about my book signing, and he came by and bought a book. And Coach Dotson, Wayne Dotson, who no longer lives in this area, moves down to South Carolina. We're friends on Facebook. He got a copy of my book. Coach Land, I don't know where he is, and Coach White, who had great fame up at
Salem, right?
At Salem, absolutely. And a heck of a coach. He was our head line coach at the time, but he went on to Salem and just carried that program. And it's like not Bart Starr, but Vince Lombardi. He's the one that turned the Packers around years ago and gave them their winning attitude. Well, that's the way my coaches were to me. They took this kid that was broken and turned around and gave him a winning attitude.
Do you coach?
I do not. I do not. Not had the opportunity really to get into it. Right now, I don't know. I just hadn't thought about it. Never been approached about doing it. But I have done some speaking, especially to my MS group, about dealing with issues and continuing to push through them. They've been great supporters of me as well.
So you're involved with the MS community here in Roanoke?
I am. For years, I was with the Blue Ridge chapter that covered this part of the state. Through restructuring within the MS Society, we now only have one chapter that covers the state of Virginia, West Virginia, and parts of Kentucky, with not many more people. So what we did about 5 years ago in this part of the state, we organized our own 501c3, the Multiple Sclerosis Alliance of Virginia. Not to replace the MS Society, we could never do so and don't want to. In fact, we're affiliated with them. We're affiliated with the Multiple Sclerosis Foundation. We're affiliated with MS News and Views. We are just another small cog in a big wheel to try to help make lives better for folks living with MS, both folks like myself that have MS and their family members, because they have MS as well. And it can be a struggle.
Well, educate me and maybe some of the audience too. You hear talk about MS on TV or radio, but give us the skinny on it. What is MS? How many people does it affect? And just what should a person expect or visualize in their head when they hear MS?
There are probably, and I'm using this number, I know it used to be over 300,000, but I'd say probably at least 500,000 people in the state of Virginia that have MS now these days. Sometimes there are diseases that are very akin to it, like lupus, but MS itself, there's not a specific test for MS. They have to do a series of tests that they can rule out other diseases and illnesses before they come back, well, it appears that you have MS. And basically it's just a series of circumstances and health-related issues that happen to you over a number of years that confirm the diagnosis of MS. Like I've had exacerbations. I've had the loss of vision in one eye, which came back. I've had exacerbations where at times I had struggled walking. This was in my earlier days when I was able to walk. but I would use Solumedrol, an IV steroid for 3 days, and generally that helped turn it around, because that's one thing about MS. Generally, the exacerbations will go into remissions. Now, there are folks that have the chronic progressive multiple sclerosis that go into major exacerbations, and unfortunately, that's pretty much where they stay. And that's sad, because you go from being a vibrant, athletic person to being a person that's dependent on a drug to rebound you or try to rebound you, and it can be disheartening, it can be defeating. And I am just lucky that, like I said, I had the coaches and the people that believed in me and taught me to believe in myself. And even though I have moments of disparity, which I think everyone does, I don't like to stay there.
Right.
I like the feeling of riding up that mountain, because I know what's on the other side. I love my downhills.
I bet you do. Well, when you've done these cross-country cycling excursions to raise money for MS research, International Falls, where is that?
That is on the Canadian border in the very northern tip of Minnesota.
So you went from there to New Orleans.
In 2006, and that was a year after I had my right hip replaced, and roughly 25 years after the doctor had done the surgery on my right foot and ankle, with his, in my opinion, misdiagnosis. And I loved every minute of it. During that trip, we rolled into a small Alabama town. In fact, it was a, getting a plug, maybe I get a free sandwich. It went into a Subway. And a guy walked in there, he was sitting there eating, and I walked in with the other riders, and he looked at me and said, "You can ride a bike with that leg?" And I didn't have to say a word. One of my other friends stepped up and said, "Yes." And he rode cross country with us too. And he's a good rider. And another one of my friends standing up for me. And I never had to say a word.
And then you went from L.A. to Boston.
That was in 2002. And that was back when I was walking pretty well and working full-time and management.
Can you walk at all now, Kenny?
Pardon?
Can you walk at all?
With my walker.
Gotcha. Okay.
I cannot walk without my walker.
Okay. Gotcha.
Pretty much dependent. But that's not related to the MS, in my opinion. And I do a lot of self-diagnosing because I've learned a lot over the years, because I've experienced a lot, and I've been to a lot of good doctors. But I have what's called post-polio syndrome. The neurons and axons not killed off by the polio initially allow me to continue doing the things I've done through my life, playing football at Patrick Henry in 1973, playing softball years after that, playing years of volleyball, bowling, playing basketball. I used to love to play basketball. It wasn't great, but I loved playing.
Sounds like Tim. He liked to play. He wasn't that great. He enjoyed it.
Well, I was a big guy. I took up the lane pretty well.
There you go.
Well, that would be me.
And I played a lot of church league basketball. I didn't play like high school basketball or anything like that. But and I did pretty well.
Yeah, I bet you did. Hey, we'll get back on track on that Boston to L.A. trip.
Yeah, but I mean, what's it like going across country? I mean, I've always thought about driving across country, but you bicycled across country. What's that like? What's it like on the ground level?
The first day, it's scary because you're wondering, even with all the training miles you've done, can I do it? Because I guess I had a bit of my own self-doubt due to my physical limitations. But I trained hard. I prepared hard. I've lived hard, and you just put one day after another and connect them together, and then you find yourself, you're a quarter of the way, you find yourself standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona. In fact, we went through Winslow, Arizona, and they have a statue of Don Henley and a mural on the wall of a flatbed Ford, and so...
Slow down, take a look at me. Yeah.
Amen. So I was standing there with Don Henley, and we were looking at that flatbed Ford.
I'm standing on a corner in Winslow, Arizona, was such a fine sight to see. It's a girl, my lord, in a flatbed Ford, slowing down to have a look at me. Come on, baby, don't say maybe. I gotta know if your sweet love is gonna save me.